Let me ask you something. Because it's important. Set aside everything you've been taught in school. Just think about this for a moment. What if ancient Greece never existed? Not in the way you think. Those white marble statues, those city-states with their Demos and Polis, Socrates, Aristotle, Plato. If all of that really happened, then why were all the major structures of this civilization only discovered in the mid-1800s? Why did photographers only start documenting the ancient ruins of the Parthenon in the 1820s, while European engineers were right there on site? And when you look at those photographs, why is the structure still almost entirely intact? Doesn't something about that make you want to ask questions? Because a very well-designed system has been built to stop you from asking. And right now, I'm going to walk you through when that system was built, how it works, and most importantly, why. But the real answer is hiding in the last place you'd expect. Go back to the early 1800s. The world is wrapped in a strange silence. The year is 1816, what history calls the year without a summer. But some researchers give it a far darker name, nuclear winter. As the ash cloud from Indonesia's Mount Tambora envelopes the entire planet, crops are rotting across the northern hemisphere, people are dying of starvation, and all of Europe stands dazed, staring at each other as if emerging from a catastrophe. But here's the real problem. All the records, books, and documents belonging to the civilization that existed before this crisis were being systematically destroyed. Research known as the dark reason they destroyed pre-1800 books reveals that works predating 1800 were subjected to a deliberate campaign of annihilation. Libraries burned, archives scattered, manuscripts hidden by priests in church basements were seized and destroyed. So what fills that void? A new history, written from scratch, fabricated, designed to serve a specific purpose. And the concept placed at the center of that history gains its meaning precisely during this period, ancient Greece. Now think. If a civilization had truly existed 2,500 years ago, what would their structures look like? Collapsed, worn down, buried under earth. But look at the Parthenon in Athens. In photographs taken in the 1800s, the columns are largely still standing. Many buildings across European capitals labeled neoclassical. If you didn't know when they were built, you'd assume they were ancient monuments. And right here, the mystery deepens. Because building these structures would be nearly impossible even today. Not just from an engineering standpoint, from a pure logistical standpoint. They're so massive, so precise, built so rapidly that official history contradicts itself. It says, ancient Greece built these with slave labor, but it cannot explain how the same architectural style appeared almost simultaneously in Washington, D.C., Paris, and London in the early 1800s. Is that a coincidence? Or are all these structures inherited from a civilization far older, far more advanced, and completely different from what we've been told? This is where Tartaria enters the picture. Tartaria is the name of a global civilization, visible on medieval maps, marked by European cartographers as the Great Tartar Empire, all the way into the mid-1800s, and then erased from the pages of history. The structures attributed to this civilization are not just aesthetically advanced, they are technologically advanced. Researchers claim these buildings were designed as terminals for collecting and distributing atmospheric electricity. You may know of Nikola Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower. Most people know it as an electricity transmission experiment. But what Tesla described in his own notes goes far beyond that, an attempt to reactivate a global energy grid that already existed. In other words, Tesla wasn't inventing, he was rediscovering. And what he was trying to rediscover is still hidden inside those domes, those columns, those disproportionately massive buildings now labeled ancient, vast energies still buried, still waiting to be uncovered. Now step back and connect the dots. The Great Reset of 1816. The systematic destruction of pre-existing knowledge. And then, right at that exact moment, as if conjured from nothing, the concept of ancient Greek civilization enters academic literature. German philologists rediscover the ancient Greek language in the 1810s. British travelers begin documenting Athens as fallen to ruin in the 1820s. French architects restore these structures in the 1830s. And throughout this entire process, Europe's newly rising nation-states cling to this ancient heritage to build their own legitimacy. Democracy comes from Greece. Philosophy comes from Greece. Architecture comes from Greece. The entire foundation of Western civilization, at exactly the moment it needed to be reinvented, is attributed to a single geography and a single people. This is not a coincidence. This is a branding strategy. And the most powerful weapon of that branding strategy isn't a cover-up. It's reframing. If someone turns to you, points at a building and says, "This is the legacy of Tartarian technology," what happens? You get labeled a conspiracy theorist. But if you point at the same building and say, "This is the legacy of ancient Greece," they see you as educated, cultured, and civilized. When you change the frame, you don't change the truth, you change how the truth is perceived. That is the 19th century's history writing center. Don't control the event. Control the label on the event. And spread that label through institutions with enough authoritative voice. Universities, museums, encyclopedias, state curricula. This is not a coincidence. This is a branding strategy. Let me ask you something. When you walk into a library, how many books have you seen dated before 1800? How many were handwritten manuscripts? And how many carried the label, reproduction? What is the difference between a reproduction and the original? What if there is no original? If the original texts were destroyed, then everything that remains was written afterward, copied afterward, archived afterward. And the most critical questions become, who built that archive, in what era, and under whose institutional control? The answer always leads back to the same place, 19th century Europe. Same era, same institutions, same interests. And now I want to ask you the biggest question of all. What is underneath those domes? Look carefully at the architecture of the buildings labeled neoclassical or ancient across Europe, America, and the world. Why do so many buildings, thousands of kilometers apart, use the exact same proportional system? Why are so many of them built with copper, lead, and specially quarried stone, materials used in energy transmission? Why are the underground floors of most of them either completely sealed off or closed to access under the pretext of structural danger? And why did Nikola Tesla leave behind notes saying these structures could be reactivated to channel energy, only for those notes to be seized by the FBI within hours of his death? Ancient Greece is not a civilization. It's a label. And underneath that label lies a fiction, one that covers the tracks of real history, erases the traces of real technology, and resets the memory of a real global civilization. You don't have to believe this, but at the very least, do this. The next time you see an ancient Greek artifact in a museum, don't look at how old they say it is. Look at who is doing the saying, and when they started saying it. The people who asked this question have always been the ones left on the outside. Now you're asking it too. That's no coincidence. In fact, none of this is a coincidence. This is a cover-up and a branding operation. I hope that from now on, you'll look at history and its remnants through a very different set of eyes.